Today I want to cover the do's and don'ts of drawing a portrait with coloured pencil. So I have drawn the same picture of a lady twice. I've got my do picture and I've got my don'ts. So I thought it'd be interesting to cover specifically what went right on one drawing and what went wrong on the other. Now I should clarify that I'm particularly focusing on drawing realistic portraits, and both of these drawings are from the same reference photo. I always like to draw from a reference. I do find it makes it 10 times more realistic than what I could do from my imagination. Alright, let's get straight into it. Let's start off with a very important don't. Don't rush the sketch. Proportions are so important. You could do everything else perfectly, but if the proportions aren't right, the drawing won't look right. You would be setting yourself up for failure. Now on the don't drawing, I'm not actually getting this massively wrong and out of proportion. I'm just rushing it far more than I did with the do picture. So maybe things are a little bit out of proportion, but not massively. Now as far as where I start with the actual drawing, I'm beginning this in a very similar way on both the do and the don't. With both drawings, I'm using a darker pencil to start marking out the eye area and just getting a very rough template that I can start adding some colour to. The main difference here is that with the don't drawing, I'm using a much darker pencil, and I'm also using much firmer pressure. This means that I'm really committing to both the colour and the placement, and I'm not leaving myself any room for any mistakes that I might make and need to correct. Compare that to the do drawing. I'm using a still quite dark but slightly lighter pencil, and I'm using it very lightly. So I can clearly see the eye that I'm drawing out, but if I did make a mistake, it would be easy to correct because the pencil's gone down so lightly. For the iris now, you don't want to just go in really hard with one colour. On my don't drawing, I'm using a light brown and I'm just covering the whole of the iris. And I'm doing this with very hard pressure. This is going to make putting other colours over the top much harder. So I'm not really able to build up any texture or variety within that iris, which is going to make it look more realistic. Compare that to the do drawing. I did actually start with exactly the same colour, but I did a much lighter layer. This means I'm able to build up a variety of other colours over the top of this, and I'm able to add a bit more texture to the iris. Now, although I have built up a lot of colours on this do drawing, I will still come back to it a bit later. That's something that I'm not going to do on the don't drawing, but we'll see that in a little while. Onto the skin now, and there's a few things I'm doing differently here. First off, I am starting with the same colour on both drawings. On the don't drawing, I'm putting down a sort of medium to hard pressure and kind of just scribbling across where the skin's going to go. I'm not focusing on trying to make this smooth like I would like the skin to be. I'm just trying to get down some hard colour. And this is going to make the skin look very scratchy. In comparison, on my do drawing, when I'm putting down this same colour, I'm working much lighter. So I'm working in these little circular motions rather than scribbling back and forth. And that is making the pencil go down far smoother and softer, and it's not leaving any marks. My main goal here is to make her skin as smooth as possible. You also don't want to be limiting your colours on the skin. On this drawing, I'm really only using 3 colours for the skin. I've got the light flesh colour I used at the very beginning. I've got more of a darker pink and a reddish brown, and those are the only colours I'm going to use at this point. This is going to make it look very flat and not very interesting. If you compare that to the amount of colours I'm using on the do drawing, I'm using a variety of different browns and pinks, and I'm also looking for any other colours I can see within the skin. So for example, on this drawing, there's some purple underneath her eyes, so I want to be adding that in as well. My rule for when you're drawing from a reference photo is always, if you can see it, you should draw it. And I can see purple under her eyes. Let's briefly talk about eyebrows and how you should go about drawing those. So on the don't drawing, I'm using the same pressure on the whole of the eyebrow, and I'm making all of the hairs go in the same direction, so going horizontally across. This is not looking very natural. Eyebrow hairs actually go in a number of different directions, and they tend to be darker in some areas and lighter in others. For example, generally towards the middle they point in a more upward direction, and then they start curving round and to the outside of the face as it gets further along. Also, generally speaking, it's darker because the hairs are thicker in the middle, and then they get lighter towards the outside edge because the hairs get more sparse. So in this drawing, I'm taking the time to build up the hairs, firstly making sure that they're going in the right directions. But I'm also using, once again, much lighter pressure and putting more layers over the eyebrows rather than pressing harder to build up the colour. I'm using these light little flicking motions, and by going over the area a number of times, it gradually builds up that texture of the hairs. I can even later add in more colours if I want to make an area darker, for example, on the eyebrows. Let's talk a little bit about facial features, particularly the nose and mouth. Now, something I see people doing all the time is outlining these facial features, particularly underneath the nose and around the mouth with a really hard line. If you were to look in the mirror, you wouldn't see a hard outline around your lips, for example. You would maybe see a slight shadow underneath your bottom lip and a slight shadow underneath your nose, but it's certainly not a hard line. So on the don't drawing, I am going to use a dark pencil and put a really hard line under the nose and around the mouth. What you actually want to do is, once again, build up some of the colours gradually. So under the nose, there is a little bit of a shadow under there. And I am putting a little bit of a line underneath her nose, but it is very, very light and something that I'm building up gradually. It's also not a consistent line under the whole of her nose. For example, there's a darker shadow under her right nostril. So I want to build up some more and darker colours there, and then I want it to be lighter on the left-hand side. Same around her lips. I haven't gone with a really dark line around her lips. She actually has maybe a darkish pink line around her lips, and by adding that in, that's a way that I'm able to outline her lips. But it's not a really sharp line, and it very much blends into the skin around it. Let's talk about teeth, and actually the teeth were very easy on the don't drawing. I just left them blank. You don't want to leave them blank and bright white. You also don't want to put a really dark, thick outline around each tooth. Now, when you actually look at teeth, they aren't bright white. Even the whitest teeth would have some variation in colour. So this lady, for example, her teeth have a very, very light hint of yellow and then the odd patch of grey. Either patches because that's how teeth naturally look, or there's some lines where shadows are created in her mouth. For example, this tooth on the very right hand side is quite deep in shadow, and as a result it is quite a lot darker than the rest of the teeth. By shading that in with a darker grey, it's not making her teeth look black, it's just making the mouth look more 3D. Now, you don't want to forget to keep layering. It is so important. Now that I've drawn the whole of the face on the don't drawing, I am going to go back in and add some darker colours, but I'm really just going to add the 1 or 2 darker colours. Build up the face a tiny bit more, but there isn't a huge amount I can do because I already went in so hard with the pencil. There's no amount of adding more pencil in that I can do that's going to smooth out the skin. And I'm not going to add any more colours in, which is going to stop the skin from having any extra depth. On the do drawing, I am spending a lot longer on the skin. Now that I can look at the face as a whole, I find it much easier to see what colours are missing and what colours need adding. And I am adding a huge variety, as I said before. A variety of different greys and purples, as well as the more obvious browns and pinks. And because I'm doing this slowly, it's looking far softer and you can't see my pencil strokes anywhere near as easily. As I said, this method is far more forgiving. If I add in a colour that I think doesn't look right, it's only a light layer and I can quite easily cover it with a different colour. I'm just going to speed through drawing the neck and shoulder on bow. Once again, I used the same mistakes on the don't drawing. I went in very hard with the pencil and I didn't use a huge amount of colours. I also didn't try and put down smooth layers of pencil, whereas I did the complete opposite on the do drawing, using a variety of colours and making sure that my pencil is very smooth and in light layers. So at this point, let's take a minute to talk about hair. And actually, in a way, I used quite similar methods on both. So when you're drawing hair, you don't want to draw the individual strands, you want to draw it in clumps. Hair does naturally sort itself into clumps, and by drawing those clumps, you end up with hair that looks realistic. That said, there is a few mistakes I'm making here, even though I am drawing in the clumps. To start off with, I've gone straight in with a medium brown, and I'm not using it lightly. I'm applying very hard strokes with the pencil, and also the pencil is very blunt, which is leading to these very thick strokes. This is making her hair right off the bat look very clumpy. I then only used a further 2 colours. It's also not very rich, there's not a lot going on with it as far as colour goes. In comparison, on the Do drawing, I spent a reasonable amount of time building up some base layers. So I started with a couple of very light colours that I can see within her hair. And then I used the same mid-brown that I started with on the other drawing and just marked out the very darkest parts. And this made my life a bit easier when it came to building up the rest of the hair because I could see much clearer where all of the different clumps are. Then after building up the base layer, I started adding in some hair-like strokes. I did this much lighter than I did on the previous drawing, and I made sure I had a very sharp pencil so that they could be really fine strokes. And I just very lightly flicked back and forth with the pencil. And because I was softer with the pencil, it made a softer looking hair. I then worked through a number of different colours, always making sure I had a sharp pencil, so I could gradually build up more contrast and more variety. Something I didn't add in on the Don't drawing is lots of the little flyaway hairs around the edge of the lady's face. Now these I find are very important for making a drawing look more realistic. If you haven't got those little flyaway hairs, it just looks a little bit like a hat that's been put on her head. I add these in by making very light flicks of the pencil going away from her head. I don't overdo it with these, I just add a few here and there and it does make a massive difference. Now both drawings are mostly finished now, but I'm going to approach the end in very different ways. Firstly, on the Don't drawing, I'm just going to go crazy with the black. I'm going to add loads of black around her eyes, on her eyebrow, loads around her mouth, and also an awful lot on her hair. And this is going to make the drawing look a lot less natural. It's going to make a lot of her features look very harsh and odd, particularly her hair. In contrast, I am going to add more colours to the other drawing, but I am generally going to stay clear of the black. I'm going to further build up her skin tones. Now that I'm looking at the drawing as a whole, it's much easier to see which colours are missing. So I'm going to continue building that up. And at the very end, I am going to use some black, but I'm going to use the very tiniest part and only in the absolute darkest areas. So for example, around her top lash line and also a tiny bit in the very darkest parts of her hair. But I'm not spending long adding this in at all, and I am still doing it very lightly. I don't want to have really harsh black. There are so many ways you can build up contrast. You don't have to just do it all with the black pencil. Dark browns generally, or maybe greys, I find look far more natural. Alright, and that is my do's and don'ts for drawing portraits. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting the like button. And if you'd like to watch another video about how to draw portraits, click on the video here. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.